Our next speaker was a graduate of Joliet Catholic back in 1958. Tom Kennedy lived in Wilmington, ended up becoming one of the great two-sport athletes in Lewis history. Tom did not play basketball at Joliet Catholic during his four-year career. I was not the coach then, obviously, because I would have played him. But Tom used to have to bring, the problem is it was transportation from Wilmington. He used to drive a tractor to school his freshman and sophomore year, which made him tardy very often. And he had to leave early too, so he was never able to practice. Finally, his junior year, he was able to get a car, and so he had the opportunity to play baseball his junior and senior year. Well, my dad recruited him to play baseball at Lewis. And then Dad saw him shooting around in the gym one day and said, would you mind playing on our team? Dad was coaching basketball at the time. Well, Tom sat the bench for a year and a half. This is one of Gordie's best decisions, I think. So then finally, midway through his second season, puts Tom in the game. Tom goes on, he scores 28 points. He goes 10 for 12 from the floor, 8 for 8 from the foul line. Tom went on to become an All-American in 1962, was drafted in 1962 by the Chicago Zephyrs, which is the Chicago Bulls. He is in the Lewis Hall of Fame. His number 14 was retired, but it only took Dad a year and a half to figure out that this guy may be able to help our team. And as Gordie said, the amazing thing, and we were figuring out the other day, how many wins within our family. My brother Bob has been fortunate enough to coach a long time, so has I, my daughter, and we're over 4,000 wins as a family. And it was nice that Dad chipped in 2,400 of those, so we certainly would like to thank him for that. But Tom also had the pleasure, I hope it was, to work with Dad. He had to drive with Dad so that and listen to him sing. But Tom also worked with him at Lewis and at St. Francis, and it's, again, our pleasure to have Tom here today to give his thoughts about Dad. Tom?
I'm following Goose on this one, just get a little warm up here and so on. And I'd have to correct you guys, everybody said about being the number one son. I was the number one son. I mean, that's now, I'm actually from Braidwood. Anybody know where Braidwood is? Is anybody here from Braidwood? No, there's nobody who lives there anymore, I don't think. I'm, as Mike mentioned, 17 years old. I'm 6'5" and maybe 155 pounds. And I got the scholarship, a big scholarship to go to Lewis. Gordie saw me play one time, and he said, you're a baseball player. And he said, okay, I'll give you a $250 scholarship to go to Lewis. Hey, this is the big time. $250 scholarship. So as a result, I ended up at Lewis, and as Mike indicated before, I was a baseball player. And the thing is, not just a baseball player, but also in my freshman year, and Frank Karpowitz. Frank, you here? There's Frank, and Davey Forrester, right there. And there may have been some other guys here too, but there was a time, I'm a first baseman, a skinny first baseman, and you know first baseman are a first baseman, and that's it. Well, in a game against Aurora, my freshman year, last game of the year, Gordie is coaching, and our two catchers said they had to leave early because they had job commitments for the summer and so on. So Gordie came to me and said, I know you caught batting practice once or twice this year. You're the catcher today. Frank was pitching, Ed Padlock was pitching also during that day, but he said, you're catching today. And of course, what do you say? Of course, Coach, anything you say, Coach. And I caught, and we won the game. And because of Frank and some good pitching, we won the game. That's one thing. the next year, I'm still, pretty much a baseball player. And two of our pitchers, one pitcher was in the outfield. We didn't have that many guys. We only had probably 11 guys. And our first pitcher came out and put the left fielder in, and it's in the 10th inning. After the 10th inning, the score is tied, and he can't pitch anymore. Don Dans can't pitch anymore. So he walked out to the mound, and we're all standing around, and he goes, "Tom, you're the pitcher." I hadn't pitched more than one inning in my whole life, and that was in Little League, I think it was. "Okay, anything you say, Coach." "Of course." I struck out the side. How I did it, I still don't know. Ronnie Ferdansky was the catcher. I threw sidearm. I didn't know where the ball was going, but somehow I got 3 guys to strike out because Gordie said you could do it. That was the whole key, right, Billy? That was the whole key. And, those are the things that happen. Then, as Mike indicated, one day he looked at me in my freshman year, and he said, "Tom, you're a basketball player." Of course, I said, "Of course, Coach, anything you say." What else do you say to Gord? You just do that. But the epitome of his understanding things about coaching and talent was when in 1962, Eddie, you were there. Kenny Malarski, you were there. Is Bob Martineau here? He's not. We had, Tony was there. Tom Deaton, where's Tom Deaton? Tom's right there. Tom was there, 1962. Okay, we're down 1 game. We got 1 loss already, and we have to play Sam Houston State again. Now, this time he didn't look at me to pitch, by the way. But we had, Sam Houston State had 8 left-handed hitters, 1 right-handed hitter. And we've pretty much used up our pitching, but he looked at Bob Bachman, our center fielder. Now, Bob has not pitched all year. He's our center fielder. And he said to Bob, "Bob, we need a left-handed pitcher. You're it today." And of course, Bob said, "Of course, Coach, anything you say." What else do you say to Gordie? Bob Bachman went through 9 innings, still hadn't given up another run. We hadn't scored any runs. Eddie, you remember this, don't you? Maybe. I'm not sure, Eddie. I know Tony remembers it. I know Pat Sullivan remembers it. So he pitched into the 10th, then into the 11th. His arm is, he could tie his left shoe with his arm. It's hanging down that far. In the meantime, by the way, Gordie got thrown out of the game for arguing a call that Chuck Schwartz made a catch, and we argued it, and Kenny Malarski got thrown out of the game. Ray Coughlin got thrown out of the game, and Gordie got thrown out of the game. But they were sitting up in the bleachers. I know they were. And somehow, Bob Bachman pitched that 12th inning, got him out again. We went to bat. We did not score. So now we're in the 13th inning. Bach can't make it anymore. His arm now is on the ground. He's hanging. Who do they bring in? Tom Deaton. Tom, remember this, I believe. Tom Deaton comes in and shuts him out also. So now it's in the bottom of the 13th inning, and I'm on third, and who comes up to bat with 1 out? Bob Bachman. He hits a line drive into center field, and I know it's a base hit. But before I take 4 steps, or 3 or 4 steps off of third base, I hear a voice. It was like Gordis ex Maxima. God coming from the, well, actually, he was right over there in the bleachers. Tom, tag up. The guy, the outfielders had shallowed up. The guy made the catch. I scramble back to third and go to score. Tony Delgado is on deck. He's telling me to slide, slide, slide. The throw is a terrible throw. I slide. The throw is awful anyhow. We win the game 1-0. The upshot of it is, after Bob Bachman pitches for the first time of his life in this kind of a game for 12 innings, and then drives in the winning run, Tom Deaton gets the win. Now, Tom, you're gonna have to give that win back to Bob. I swear to God, that's it. Well, you know, Gordie had this way about him that he could just make you believe that anything is possible. Well, I'm a Gordie disciple. I know I shouldn't take that too far, but I am a Gordie disciple. You are Gordie disciples. He's touched so many lives that we'll never know how many lives he's really touched. But he's the one who made all this thing possible, everything. And just changed my life, no question about it. And changed the lives of so many people. You know, they say that passing the torch on to the next generation. I'll tell you what, Gordie's torch was so bright that it would make the Chicago fire look dim. And the Chicago fire did go out. Gordie's light did not go out because he passed it on to Paul, he passed it on to Tom Deaton, he passed out all these guys here, all of you, he's passed that light on to everybody. So the light really is brighter than it ever has been. There's no question about it. Eddie, you got it. Johnny Lou, you got it. Bobby Blackburn, you got it. I mean, everybody here. We know from one another how good Gordie was and what he meant to us. We are Gordie disciples, whether you want it or not. Now, I've just got an idea that somebody's coming up out of the dugout. Hang on just a minute. Yes, Coach? Yes, Coach. I'm done. I'm done, I know. But what a great man. Thank you.
That little bit of hand gesture in there, little too. Yes. He'd go here, and then he'd be right up there for you right away. We're going to watch a short video here, second one. But before we do, this is another thought from Dad that I would like to share before. The video is about 7 minutes, and then we'll wrap this thing up here with the remaining speakers. But this is for everybody that is here. The memories you have, especially for my family, of Dad, husband, grandpa, coach, friend, are the only things that you can keep. And those moments that made those so very special to you, I ask you to hold those memories dear to your heart and don't ever let them go, because we all know that Dad never let them go, ever.
You know what, fellas, unless you believe what I believe, I've been believing this for a long time. I teach the most important course of the day. When I'm on that football field, I'm teaching the most important course. And when I'm on that, now that sounds corny, but you are teaching the game of life. Now, if you get an attitude, you're talking about, hey, you're talking about blood and guts, right? I mean, I'm going to stay in here, and I'm going to block and tackle, or I'm going to get in that batter's box, and I'm working, and I'm getting those ground balls, and I'm working to my right, and I'm working to my left, and the sweat's pouring, and I got a strawberry this big, and this hurts in here, and I got to go, and I'm out in that mountain, and I'm telling Coach that my arm don't, and it's falling off. How many of you guys weren't even able to wipe your fanny sometimes where your arm was so sore? Johnny Sain told me he pitched for 3 years with a sore arm. 3 years, and he wouldn't ever tell anybody because he didn't want anybody taking his job. 3 years, he said I couldn't raise it up. Every 4th day, though, I raised it up. Do you understand? Do you understand what you're giving? Do you understand what you're giving to somebody? You're giving them the opportunity to go through this and establish the same philosophy that you guys, the hard work, the ethics, this is what, we don't cheat, we don't lie. Goodness gracious, where are they going to hear it today, Coach? I'm sure, in describing his roommate, Warren Spahn, he could hit a gnat's ass. Fellas, do you realize what hitting a gnat's ass is? That's pretty. Did you ever see Spotty work? He could work. He worked it that way, guys. He worked it that way. 5 consecutive years he had the Golden Glove. 5 consecutive years, never made an error, and pitched more innings than anybody in the game. Ernie pitched more innings than anybody in the game in those 5 years, never made an error. Accident. Great fielder. By chance, Brock and Wills, 2 best race runners at that time, and part of the 5 best of all time. How many bases did they steal off of Spotty? Coach. Now, come on. You're going to be horse manuring me, Gordie. Brock and Wills didn't. What is this guy giving? I mean, we don't know. Where are you getting all these names, Grandpa Gordie? I mean, you're throwing out Yogi and Spot. We don't know about these guys now. Are we back in all those? Because it has what to do with what? I'm talking about a psychology of what? A philosophy of what? Of defense. Kills me, guys, when we punt a football 4th and 1. I have never punted a football 4th and 1 in my life, and I'm going to my grave never punted a football. We can't make a yard. Do you understand? We can't. They're telling us we can't make a yard. You understand what I'm talking about here? That's the idea of a team. Now the other way, you can imagine Buck is saying, "Are you going to get that yard?" You understand what we got going? And then Vince telling you. Losing is worse than death. But he said, you see, when you become a team, that's what it feels like, right? Coach, tell me the bleeding. I've been there. I've been there, guys. I've been in the World Series 15 times. I'm telling you, I've been there. I know what it is to get beat in the bottom of the 9th with a home run. I know what it is to throw a pitch. I know what it is to strike out. Striking out Freddie Zerwanka. He was striking out in the 1st inning, and he wanted the ball hit him in the face, for the Christ's sake. That's the kind of players that I want to have. Understand? Now we have a team. And that's what Vince, you see how he turned it around up there? He turned it around up there. That was his what? First thing he did when he went to the Packers, you know what he did? That's the training room door. That's the training room door. He took 2 boards, 2x4. Wham, wham, doom, doom. No one's hurt. No one's hurt. What's wrong with it? Since you were 3 years old, you wanted to win the checker game with your dad, and your dad wanted to beat you. That's part of it. It's okay. It's okay, guys. Teach it, because we ain't going to cheat. We ain't going to lie. We ain't. See, you're going to be different than those jackasses, see, that cheat and lie and steal. They're a small percentage. You're the good guys. You're in the white hats. You know why you're in the game. You know why you've got a philosophy. This is my philosophy. They aren't the 10 suggestions, guys. They're the 10 commandments. Do you understand what I just said? They are not the 10 suggestions. They are the 10 commandments. And who's going to tell the kids right from wrong if you don't? The trouble is you can't say it. You got to live it. And that ain't easy all the time. And that ain't easy all the time. We used the percentage before of 65%, right? Wins. How much percentage is pitching in baseball? 75, 80, right? You rate it that high. And we're talking about not offense, but we're talking about defense. Defense. Woo! Defense, right? Ooh, you get all fired up when you're football, boy. Basketball, I want to go. Huh? Some of the greatest matchups I've ever seen. Oscar Robertson versus Jerry West. All right? Michael Jordan versus the guy from Detroit when he beat him up every day. Or 3 guys guarding Michael. All right? That's exciting stuff. Pitching's 80% of the game, and you can hit a Nats behind, and you don't see the base stolen off you. I understand what I'm talking about. You feel 1,000. Are you going to win? Why was Spahn the winningest pitcher in the history of the game? Because he did those 3 things. Plus he had the Freddie Sirwankin that I was telling you about, right? Because he felt like Vince Lombardi. That losing is worse than death, right? Losing is worse than death. That's the way I got to go out to compete, right? You ain't going to beat me. It's never over until it's over. Who's the toughest hitter you ever faced? Anybody with a bat? Wham, wham, wham.
Thank you. Obviously, that morning that Dad spoke at that clinic was not one of the days that he allowed Joan to pick out his pants. Yeah. And he had his Jungle Jim shirt on there, too. Wow. It's amazing that as Margaret talked and Billy talked about forgiveness, and Dad talks about the 10 Commandments, and that his unforgiving love of all of us, because God knows that I've broken my share of commandments, and I never was lectured. I was always spoken to, and that's something that I will always remember for the rest of my life, and hopefully I can pass that on to my own children continually. Real quick, before I bring up the next person, as you saw early in the video that Dad was in the Navy back in 1944 through 1946. Just so that you know, Dad was stationed at Great Lakes. He got to go home for lunch every day, and he also just played basketball. They were on the traveling U.S. Naval basketball team. So one of the great questions that I always wanted to ask Dad, well, how was it being in the war? And when he told me that he was able to go home for lunch, I knew that it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. That's right. I'm going to bring up my brother Gordie to introduce our next speaker. He's one of his best friends and probably one of the greatest athletes to ever play at Joliet Catholic. Goose?
It is my great pleasure to introduce a friend of mine that I've known since first grade. He's a dear friend, been a family friend, and was a friend of my dad for 50 years. Mark Parker played football at Joliet Catholic in 73, 74, and in 75 he was captain and starting quarterback on the first state championship team. He then went on to Coe College in Cedar Rapids, Division III, played football, basketball, and baseball in college. Not bad. And he was an All-American baseball player. Please welcome Mark Parker.
Thank you very much. It's interesting in reading many of the things that have been written about Coach Gillespie in the last few weeks, certainly some of the things that were said this morning, that you hear a lot of things that are repeated. And I'm going to probably do the same thing, but that's the idea of the impact that Coach has had in the lives of so many. If I could just ask, I'm going to ask a couple of favors, but the first one, if you would just close your eyes, I'm going to talk about Coach's voice. And that video that we just saw is a perfect example, but what is the voice when you think with your eyes closed that you hear of Coach? As attested by the video we just saw, and for many of us, he could hold a room of thousands of his peers at bay, sitting on the edge of their seat waiting for the next word, just by his voice. Coach is not a yeller or a screamer, but he could get his point across very well. More importantly, it was a voice that for many of us sitting here and many of us that are not, that we understood as being something that we could hold on to. I had the good fortune over the years. The interesting thing about the 1975 football team is that was the first of many state champions. But the interesting fact about that is that state playoff football in Illinois was in its infancy at that time. So it was uncharted water. It started in 1974 and we got to the quarterfinals and had a good season. And obviously there were a number of players coming back in the 75 season and there was a great deal of interest and hope and potential, I guess. But that was still something that no one really knew much about. There were other state championships in other sports, but not in football. So that team had the good fortune of being the first of many that came after that. So it was still one of those things that no one really understood that much about. And I'll talk about a story of that just in a minute. But I'd like to, if possible, relive a few moments of Coach's voice and the things that his voice could do for all of us. I remember very well playing for Bob in basketball that his dad helped coach a little bit. And I was a freshman, and we had a morning practice. And it was the end of the practice, most people were gone, and he kept a few of the people on the floor afterwards. And I was very fortunate to have grown up with the Gillespie family. So Coach Gillespie was not Coach Gillespie then. He was a person that I knew as Goose's dad. And he was trying to get us to do something, and I was kind of like, you're asking us to do what? He wanted us to be near midcourt, and with 2 dribbles, get all the way to the basket. And he was serious about it. So it was one of those things that the people, and if any of you were there, please correct me if I'm wrong about this, but he kept imploring us, you could do this. In 2 dribbles, you could get to the basket from midcourt. And I kept thinking, there's no way, and we tried it a few times, and I can just hear his voice right now, dumb freshman as I was. Come on, you could do it. And not just me, but the other people that were there. Now, honestly, it was never one of those Michael Jordan moments that I really did get to the basket with 2 dribbles. But he truly put in my head at that moment the idea that just keep trying, and to hear his voice helping you along. What is the voice that you hear from Coach Gillespie in your ear? Sophomore year, early in the football season. Mike Bank, are you here? Okay, sorry. I'm going to get us both. And there may be a few people who are in attendance right now that can attest to this moment in history of Joliet Catholic football. It was, again, very early in the season. I should not have been on the varsity team, but I was as a backup to an outstanding quarterback, Mark Lawless. Mike should have been on the varsity team as a center. One of the first scrimmages that we were involved with was, I could stand here right now as a 56-year-old middle-aged has-been getting nervous about it. One of the first scrimmages that we were involved with, and Mike and I went in, and we had trouble on the center quarterback exchange. Not like 1 fumble, probably not like 2. And as Coach Gillespie is so famous for his precision, he finally just lost it. Now, we were banished to the sidelines, Mike and I, to go through the quarterback center exchange. And I don't know the exact words today, Banco, but I know the tone of his voice. And it was one of those that I was about ready to wet myself because we were just over there. And to this day, I'm going to finally admit to it, you were a bully because you hurt my hands when you centered the ball. I was not strong enough or tough enough to be able to take those center snaps. Finally, I think we got it down after a little bit, but I could just hear Coach Gillespie's, at that point in time, you've tested my patience, Sir Parker. So it was not Mike's fault, it was my fault all these years later. Coach, sorry about that. Later, a couple years later, during our senior year, we had one of those Saturday morning practices that everybody is kind of just dragging down in the pit. And it was a practice that was not going very well. And I think he had this, break to go get a drink or something like that. And all of a sudden, as Coach did so very well, he started talking about a movie. And I wish to this day that I could remember which movie it was, but I can't. But it started out with just a couple of people standing there because most of the players had kind of gone off to get a drink somewhere. And he was talking about, it was a kind of a Western, I guess, and there were these people that were standing around a river, and there was a guy's arm that had been cut off, and he was extending his middle finger, and they were going down the river, and they were kind of doing this to the people who were standing on the banks and whatnot. So all of a sudden, all the players are standing around now listening to him. And he is going kind of on and on for what seemed like an eternity. I imagine it was only a few minutes. And finally, everybody was kind of in a good mood. We had a tough practice up until that time, and everybody was in a good mood. And I will never to this day forget, when he was done, he winked at me. And in that voice, hearing it right now, let's get down to business. Went back to practice. One of those crazy, crazy things, thinking about this, but when I saw that wink of his eye, let's get back to practice, and everybody went back to doing their job. There were a couple of times, it was talked about this morning a little bit, during his years as an intramural director at Joliet Catholic, and he spent hours and hours and hours there. But some of those goofy team names that all the intramural teams came up with and whatnot, I can remember very well, and I'm going to ask some help from some people out there, listening to Coach Gillespie's voice. Who was it that he ran out of the gym during floor hockey for knocking somebody down? Who was that? That's what I thought. I thought, Brownie, are you here? I thought it was Kevin Brown, and I could hear Coach Gillespie's voice literally running him out of the gym and I don't know who the unlucky person was that Brownie ran into, but I can hear Coach Gillespie's voice running him out of the gym down the steps at Joliet Catholic. And again, just that voice echoing in the halls. Needless to say, he was not in a very good mood at that moment. I also remember a time in the fall of our senior year, we were out at the Stephen Tennis Center at the campus of St. Francis. There was intramural tennis, and we were out there talking about some different things and whatnot. And one of the topics that came up in our discussion was the idea of football. And I think we were in the middle of the season somewhere along the way. And he didn't really mention it quite often because, again, it was such a new thing to all of us. But the idea of, we just got to keep playing and whatnot, and hopefully we get into playoffs and whatnot. But he talked about some of the teams that never had that chance, that never had that opportunity, because obviously they played before the playoff system was implemented. And he just talked about the idea that those guys were great teams, great individuals, great memories of his. And I'm sure he's talked about that for years and years and years. The idea that some of those people never had a chance to show themselves on the gridiron in regards to playoff football. But again, one of those things, just I could see that he was always thinking. And all those teams that didn't have the chance, that hopefully Hilltopper teams in the future would be able to participate in. I also remember very well during the late winter, early spring of 1976 at an intramural gathering where he and I were sitting. I can still see where we were sitting on top of the bleachers. When you walk into the Joliet Catholic gym, the old gym, immediately to the right, we were just sitting up on the top bleacher there. The bleachers were not out, but they were just up. And it was a tone of his voice that I honestly had never heard before. I think obviously there were some things going on in his life, especially in regards to Lewis College and whatnot. And all I did was listen, and he just talked about different things and whatnot. Never was very specific, and I didn't ask a lot of questions. But again, it was a tone of voice that I really, truly had never heard Coach use before. Because again, some things I'm sure in his life were kind of going through some tough times. And I'm sure a lot of us sitting in this room and looking around this school right now might not have been the same had not he made some decisions. And I can remember as I walked out that night away from him, I just said, Coach, If I can ever help in any way, please let me know. Here I was, a 17-year-old, teenage jack bean, is one of his great lines. But I can remember feeling like, what could I do to help him, as much as he had helped me just in that short amount of time that I had been alive. And he wrote me a note just a couple days after that. All it did was say, thank you for being a friend. Again, here I was, a 17-year-old high school senior, not having any idea what was going to happen, but a man in my life that meant so much to me, and he was thanking me, which is pretty typical. I'll go through a few more things just over the years, because obviously, as we all could, talk about so many different memories and things like that, but talking about his voice, as evidenced by the video, he was an amazing man to listen to talk. It didn't necessarily matter sometimes what he was talking about, because his voice was just it just commanded such an attention. When he would see most of us, especially people like myself who may not be around Joliet, or were not around Joliet, when he would see you from a distance, he would kind of start saying, "Mark Parker," and it was like, "Coach, don't make a big deal. Please don't make a big deal." But he would then like say that, he would say your name 2 or 3 times, then come to you, give you a hug, and then start talking to you. And as Ryan Quigley so eloquently wrote about in his tribute to Coach, and so many other people have identified as well, he would make me feel like I was the most important person in the world. For those 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it might be. I have said this in other times, having a chance to talk to people, especially in regards to Joliet Catholic history. When you're a teenage jack bean or an early 20-year-old young adult, and he was coaching us, we knew that he was important, but we just didn't quite understand the significance. As I have gotten older, he became more and more and more and more important to me. The understanding of what he did way back when, but even more so, the fact that he still cared. And I would have the good fortune of trying to call him every so often, just to hear that voice one more time. And I wanted him to be proud, I guess. Getting into education and coaching myself, certainly my father's influence as well as Coach Gillespie's couldn't have been any more significant in my eyes. And I can remember one of the things he said, again, thinking about going into college and wanting to get into education and coaching, he said, "There's nothing greater than working with people, especially with kids." And he talked about the idea that you have such a great opportunity to do that. And he's certainly right about that. The last thing I would like to say and identify in regards to hearing Coach Gillespie's voice, not everybody had this opportunity. I honestly can't say what he might have said with his baseball teams, but one of the things he said was, when you have your team right before you go out on the field or the court, that's a wonderful moment as a coach, because you've worked so hard to get to that moment, whatever it might be. And when you have that chance, look in their eyes. Mr. Kennedy talked about that, or excuse me, Mike talked about that, looking in the eyes of the St. Francis baseball players before that big game. He said that's a powerful, powerful moment, because you're right there together. He also said right after a contest was significant as well. Yes, the games are important, no doubt about that. But he said right after the contest, using football as an example, when your guys are bloody, sweaty, muddy, hopefully you've won, but even if you haven't, to get together with those guys because they've gone to battle for you. Very significant times, he said, as the life of a coach, those moments. And we used to get together in the old cavernous locker rooms of the stadium, knowing in just a few minutes you'd be going out on the field. And you would get your hands together in the pile in that moment. And if I just think, if I could ask you to take the hand of somebody next to you, our hands are in the pile right now. We're about ready to go out to battle. Many people have talked about it. The idea that we need to carry on what he has done for us. Pretty significant for all of us. I don't think there's any question about that. We need to carry that on. And it's a pretty simple manner. Think about how he's treated all of us. and the opportunity that we have still now to carry that on. Mr. Kennedy talked about that. We had our hands together, ready to go to battle. Our battle now is to go out every single day and try to carry on the things that Coach Gillespie provided for us. And some of you will know what I'm going to say, and I wish that I could hear the exact words coming from his mouth, but if I just listen close enough and listen to the voice that I need to hear from him. Our Lady Queen of Victory, pray for us. Pray for us. Thank you.
Terrific job. Next speaker is my brother Bob, and we'll move this. Bob ended up coaching with Dad up at Ripon. Actually, Bob and I probably should have never got into coaching because in the 4th grade, Bob was in the 6th grade, we got a report card from St. Paul's. We didn't have any grade higher than a D. I ran away from home that night. I went to Honey Otis's, for those who are longtime Jolietans. Bob came and got me, got home, Dad sat us down. Dad's actual words to me was that I was going to be a Zeppelin driver. I'm in the 4th grade, I have no freaking idea what a Zeppelin was. And Bob was going to go to trade school to be a welder. Needless to say, we didn't follow Dad's plans, and we both got into coaching, but my brother Bob.
I was talking to Eddie Spezio today and just talking about could Gordie have coached the Cubs? These are things that I would think about. And this was, I believe it was this fall, Tom Kennedy and several of the Lewis athletes got together, and this might have been the last time that Coach was out. I believe it was. And I happened to be in to visit right after that. And I asked him, how did it go? Did you really enjoy it? And he got quiet, and he had never said anything like this to me, ever. And it's something that, and I told Eddie Spezio today how meaningful it was. Gordie said, Bob, do you know what Eddie Spezio told me today? And I said, no, Dad, I don't. He told me, now Eddie Spezio played for the managers, Tony La Russa, all the great Cardinal managers. I'm 15 years in the big leagues. He's the best player Gordie ever coached. Gordie would say that. I heard him say that 38,000 times. Eddie Spezio told me today, and Gordie told me, Eddie Spezio said, Gordie, you are the only person that I ever called coach. That was one of the greatest compliments that he ever received, and how I just want Eddie to know how much that meant to him, and I just wanted to share that. I have really an honor. Joliet Catholic football, and again, probably it was said today at church. He was at Joliet Catholic really for 60 years. There isn't anything that meant more to him than Joliet Catholic football. Gordie was Joliet Catholic football. He's the one that created the mystique. When you're reading the Tribune about Joliet Catholic, they're talking about Gordie. That's what they're talking about. I am so thankful to Dan Sharp. Dan did an unbelievable job because Dan kept Gordie's dream of what Joliet Catholic football is. He kept it going. When Dan coached, I never heard Gordie say Joliet Catholic. I'd call him every Saturday. How did Joliet Catholic do? This is what he always said. And I want you to know this. We won. It was always we, all the way up till 2015. And that's because of you, Dan Sharp.
Thanks, Bobby. Gordie Gillespie, you said was Joliet Catholic football. No, Gordie Gillespie is Joliet Catholic football and will always be. Thank you so much, Bobby, Mike, Goose, Greg, all the girls. This has been a wonderful day. Thank you for letting me be a part of it. And, I've had a chance to know Gordie, be very close to him for over 40 years. And everyone I know that Gordie gave a nickname to had a cool nickname. Goose, Scottie Pippen, Jack-O-Lantern. There was Broncos. There was Broncos. We had a kid, Kenny Simpson, who was a running back in the 80s. You'd think Juice, OJ would be his nickname. No. Suitcase Simpson, because Gordie knew some baseball player back in the day that was traded so much he lived out of a suitcase. So he was Suitcase Simpson. Now it's my first day at varsity football at Joliet Catholic, and Gordie's kind of going through the guys, lining them up. Mike Condon over here, Mark Gould, Mick Janko, Larry Lay. He's naming all the guys. And then he goes, not so. And nobody moves. Not so. Not so sharp, get over here. Everybody got a cool nickname. And with Gordie, you think, oh, that's it. You don't realize these nicknames stick, because if you go out to any game now at Joliet Memorial Stadium, there's a lot of people in the stands that still think I'm not so sharp. I got to enjoy my time with Gordie through football, both at Joliet Catholic and here. And when I was young, I was a second string end. I maybe got into 3 varsity games at mop-up time. But I loved the game and I loved coach. And I'd find myself trying to stand between Tony Jantz and Gordie Gillespie every game because I wasn't in the game. So I wanted to be in the game. Gordie used to always tell us, if you're not in the game, you're in the game. And I would just listen to them as they were, Gordie's calling plays and Tony's making adjustments. And I tried to call the game in my mind along with Gordie. And, he saw something, he saw that in me and encouraged it. And I'll be forever grateful, because if it wasn't for Gordie, I never would have got into coaching. And we became so close throughout it. And I really did learn a lot about not only being a coach, but what it means to be a hard worker, someone who's dedicated, how to care about others. He was the constant example of that. Now, I had a chance to coach at Joliet Catholic, and in 1983, he moved me up to the varsity, which was a great thrill for me. So now, I'm his assistant with him at every practice. I used to gauge my freshman and sophomore practice so I could spend an hour watching Gordie on varsity. So now I'm and I'm learning. Okay, and we had a pretty good team. This is in '84. We're playing up at Notre Dame and Niles. Now, Notre Dame and Niles, those guys have a little bit of a reputation. They kind of like when you get in the pile, they say, give it the business. They're kind of punching, grabbing, scratching, gouging. And we had a young fullback, Steve Polera, who was a junior. He didn't know this about Notre Dame. So anyway, we're going to play them, and I want to see Gordie's great, you heard it today, his great in-game coaching. What does he see when he's out looking at, he sees everything. What determines how he's going to call a play? He gets a great rhythm with the flow and calling his plays. And so I had that chance, because what my job was, Gordie would call the play, and he's constantly concentrating, always thinking of the next play, so I would signal the play in for him. T, 59 power, I'd do all the signaling. Now, we're playing Notre Dame. Polera's the fullback, first time playing varsity football. He calls a play called a 31 buck. That's a fullback running up inside. I signaled it, 31 buck. Polera hits the hole, 5 yards, tackled, big pile on him, and all of a sudden you hear Polera going, who the hell, forget his number, somebody's grabbing my, you know what, down in the man region. And he's screaming, and he's kicking, and he's jumping, and he pops up, and he's ready to fight anybody. Get the guys back in the huddle. I'm standing next to Gordie. Same play. Signal it in. There goes Blair, 6, 7 yards, makes a nice run. Again, there's the pile. I'm gonna kill that mother. Get his number. Will you get his number? Will you get his number? He's screaming at guys. Larson, get his number. He jumps up. Now you see he's in the huddle and he's just livid. He's barking. Now Steve was a large fullback, powerful, built like Fred Flintstone. Not the fastest guy in the world. So they're back in the huddle. I look at Gordie. Same play. I never questioned, like Tom was saying, you just said, yes, coach. I'm like, okay. They give the ball to Polari, he hits the hole, boom, 50 yards, gone. Flies right down the field. Nobody touches him. He's not that fast, but boy, he was fast on that play. And I'm looking at Gordie, and I'm like, I wanted to know this guy, his ingenious of seeing the game and knowing the play. He called the same play 3 times in a row. I go, Gordie, why would you call that play 3 times in a row? And he said, Danny, the lad was motivated. Psychology, sport, psychology that he had. What a great teacher. One of the things I would talk to Gordie quite often. Joan was very kind and come over and see him and talk to him even when it was getting late in his life. And he always wanted to know, I asked him how he's doing. No, how's the family? How's Jean, Danny? How's your mom? And then the same with him. And then he wanted to talk football. He was still drawing plays. He was still sharp. He's talking about, he could still tell you how to block Lockpour's downshift defense from 1978. He knew it was amazing, but he always liked to laugh. And we always made sure that at some point in the conversation, we'd reminisce on something funny, or whether it be Tim Allen doing, the guys from St. Francis, Tim Allen doing prep team, or, driving with him to Guernsey, which has been a theme running through the entire day today. But we always had a chance to laugh. And I think that's one of the sides that Gordie always talked about coaching, that you have to have personality too, a sense of humor. Let the guys know you're human. And he used his sense of humor so well. The guys that played at St. Francis probably recall us practicing at Guernsey Park. That's where St. Joe's Park is now. Right next to the St. Joseph Cemetery. It's fenced right along there. Gordie got a lot of mileage out of that cemetery with his sense of humor. We were having a rough week, I remember, and we weren't practicing well, making a lot of mental mistakes. Gordie's like, we miss a blocking assignment, he's getting down, showing him how to block it. Then the back hits the hole wrong, and now his frustration is building. And he's standing right next to the cemetery. Okay, I don't mean to point at you like it's a cemetery, but he was standing right next to the cemetery. All right? So he's standing, and he's there, and he's like just pointing at the cemetery. And he goes, I am so sick of yelling at you guys. He said, for Christ's sake, I yelled so much yesterday, 2 of those guys got up and left. Practice picked up a notch. He had a way of doing it. He expected you to be ready for practice. He took great pride in preparation. Never playing the sport of football, I think he really enjoyed the game of football. For its military aspect, you had to be tough. He always felt you had to be intelligent. He always believed in brain above brawn, that you outsmarted your opponents, you outthought your opponents. And he loved the creativity and all the things that football allowed him to do as a coach, and that build-up of preparation up to the one game that week. And you better be ready to practice. And you better show up in shape. You better show up to practice in condition when we start our summer practices or our fall practices in August. Well, one year, and I'll tell you what, no one coached a big game better than Gordie, and he was wound up. during the weeks of the big games. So we're preparing. Our first 2 games this year, we're playing St. Lawrence and Mount Carmel. They're like 1 and 2 in the state. A lot of Division I players. And Pat Bezzavento was a quarterback, great quarterback back then. But a couple of his linemen, guys on the left side, didn't show up in real good shape. And we were practicing. It was an easy day. We were in our 6th hour of practice. And we're practicing on the north end of the stadium where you can see the bank across the street with the time and temp. And the temp was now about 101, 102. And it was one of those hot days. And now we're going to work on our passing game, 11 on 11 passing game, pass protection, the whole bit. So Gordie calls the play, we break the huddle, everybody flies up the huddle. The 2 guys on the left, I'm not going to say their names, 2 linemen on the left, come waddling up. They get set in their stance, snap the ball, their 2 guys run right by him, right into Bezzavento. Where he goes, run it again. Get up there, they waddle up, run right by him. Run it again. Run right by him. He's beside himself. First, he's upset they weren't in shape, and now the lackluster performance and really kind of a lack of effort. So Gordie goes, we got St. Lawrence and Mount Carmel, and I don't know how we're going to beat these guys. We certainly aren't going to beat them playing football. Let me think. Now he's standing right next to those 2 linemen. I got it. Let's challenge him to a pie eating contest. The 2 guys got their heads down. They thought he was finished. They turn around walking back to the huddle, and he's behind them, which was basically reciting the Pop and Fresh menu. Cherry pie, chocolate cream pie, strawberry rhubarb pie, lemon meringue. They did pick it up at practice after that. Yeah, he could use humor. He had enthusiasm, but we were always prepared. We were always ready to play. We always believed we were better than our opponent. Practice was always tougher than the game. We all heard those things. He had tough love. He was a great disciplinarian, great teacher, and great teacher and mentor for me. Gordie said that when his time came and he would be up at the gates of heaven, that they're not going to ask him how many wins he had. No, Coach, but they know how many victories you have. We are your victories. Their speakers were saying earlier, and couldn't say it any better, his legacy will go on and on. His victories was how he treated us. And when I was that freshman, little not so sharp, and I told my mom and dad, I want to be a coach, I want to teach, I want to be a coach. And my parents asked me why, and I said, I would love someday to make a young man feel the way Gordie made me feel. I'm still trying, because he made me feel like I could conquer the world. And you all know it too. All you need to do is talk to Gordie for 5 minutes and you can do anything, right? And there's going to be a day I'm going to pick up that phone, I know. But I will always, just as I go through life and say, what would my dad do in this situation? I'll be doing a lot of what would Gordie do in this situation. When he was working with me, and was gracious enough to come back as a consultant, work with quarterbacks, be on the sideline with me. His wisdom, and his whole presence, and helping me along, which is a very stressful, coaching Joliet Catholic isn't easy. I mean, you're following Gordie, come on, right? It's not easy. And he would always say things to me, right as the national anthem ended. Danny, see clearly. Are you seeing clearly? He's telling me to focus, block out distractions. He'd say, Danny, don't miss the obvious. He didn't want me to overcoach. He didn't want me to overthink it. It's the obvious. And the one thing he always told us before we went out, you know, go all out every play. I will tell my team that every time I coach, practice and games, we're going to go all out every play. And we all know he wasn't talking about the game. He wanted us to be prepared for the rest of our lives, to go on and be good parents, husbands and wives, teachers, and spread love to others. With that, Coach, you know, I can't thank you enough. And we will go all out in every play for Gordie.
Real quick, those who played football for Dad, either here at St. Francis or at Joliet Catholic, would you please stand up at this time? Please. Thank you very much. Thank you. Next speaker is a young man. We're about the same age right now, but he was once my brother-in-law. He was also once my boss. I was his boss. Then he wasn't my brother-in-law. He did have the opportunity to play for my dad. An amazing man. And I'd like to bring up Jack Szymanski right now. Jack.
I'm the party crasher. I asked Mike if I could speak tonight. Thanks a lot for putting me between Sharpie and Sully. First of all, how many here were at the services over at St. Ray's today? Raise your hand, please. Father Tim is not here, is he? That's too bad, because we're going to have him sit over there, and every one of you that wants to have him say you're the Mass for when you die, you could sign up for that, because that was unbelievable. Agreed? Agreed? And also, before I go any further, I had the opportunity and the good fortune to have two great parents, and I gave the eulogies at their, at their masses or whatever. Billy, what an unbelievable job you did today. When I was driving over here today, and I told Goose this earlier, as I'm driving along, I thought about, a couple of weeks ago, I guess it was a week ago, we went to the cemetery after for the funeral. And when we went out there, it was very beautiful. My parents are out there as well. And as we stood around, it was freezing cold, absolutely freezing cold. And as we got through, as Goose would always do, he stood up, kind of lightened the mood by saying, hey, you know what, last night, Dad called me, or a little while ago, Dad called me, and with the weather the way it is, the games are off today. They're absolutely off. Today, when I was coming over here, how about the weather we're having? Let's play two. Before I go any further, I would like to acknowledge two people. One, Dick Goss. If you had the opportunity to read, as Gordie passed, the articles in the Joliet Herald News, if you haven't, you got to get a copy of them. It really brought everything together, all the records, all the testimonials, all that stuff. And as usual, he did a great job with that. Before we give him a round of applause, I know he had some help with all those records from Dave Lucchetta, who's over here. And Dave, what Gordie would always say, the greatest sports information person of all time. So let's give those two guys a round of applause. I do have one bone to pick with both of those guys. You forgot that Gordie coached high school baseball at Joliet Catholic, 1950 and 1951. Well, you know what, I think second thoughts, maybe we would have leave that unsaid, because his record was 16-17. I guess that's the toughest coaching job to be, is a Joliet Catholic baseball coach. But how about those 110 seasons that he coached? College baseball, college basketball, men's and women's. College football, high school baseball. The Olympics, youth baseball, Pan American Games. I was there too, Tony. And the summer teams, those kinds of things. What a success. I parsed something out of there. For example, in a 10-year span between 1971 and 1981, he took 6 college baseball teams to the NAIA World Series. Of course, he won 3 championships. While that's going on, he coaches 5 high school teams to the state championship in a 10-year span. You know, those of us who played for him, at least I had this, I had a hobby, I guess, or an annoying habit of telling all the people that I met that didn't play for him that I had the greatest coach that ever lived. You're going to tell me that when you look at when you read those articles that Dave and Dick put together, and you look at the records, that there could be anybody in the world that did what he did? I would say what he always said to us: you gotta be cartooning me. I look out today and I look at the gaping faces up here as some of these great speakers, as they come up. It reminds me when we did the Illinois High School Clinic one year at Morton High School, and I was on the Lewis team, and we were performing up on the stage, and he talked, and we were doing things, and he talked, but then a little later, it got to the point of where he was going to do psychology of coaching, like you heard earlier today. And he's looking out at these 1,000 coaches, and we're sitting up on the stage, and we're yin-yangs at that age, and I'm looking out, and it's amazing. All these coaches, 1,000 of them, they're dropped, mouths are dropped. And he gets in there, and he's working the glasses like he always did when he talking. He'd always work the glasses. And he says, he looks out and he goes, you know what, guys? Coaching's an easy profession, isn't it? It's really easy. By the way, how's your colon? How's your colon? And just to see the looks in their faces just blew me away. But you know what? When we talk about Gordie, none of it compares to the amount of lives that he touched. And everybody said this, and I'm going to say it too. Players, students, moms, dads, brothers, sisters, uncles, aunts, grandparents, families, friends. He touched all of us. And I know all of you feel like I do. When I'm so thankful that the road of fate had it so that I could and you could know him as your friend, your parent, and your mentor. And he always talked about how lucky he was to have been given the chance to pursue his life's work. But you know what? Not for the global recognition he deserved. Mike talked about the Gordie Howe incident with the article. It also reminded me, though, of the time Gordie took one of his 1970 baseball teams that won the national championship to Sox Park one day, and I'm watching the game on TV, and of course they won the national tournament, and Harry Carey's the announcer, of course with his buddy Jimmy Pearsall. And all of a sudden, Harry says, hey, Jimmy, look who's here with us tonight. Gordie Gillespie from St. Louis University. You know what? Harry would have been right on if he stopped with Gandhi and Saint. But the lucky part of all this is that he stayed with us. And he didn't listen to the train whistle for bigger and better things. Like someone talked earlier tonight, I'm thinking of George Bailey from It's a Wonderful Life. That's Gordie. He's a person who came to a city and became the city's favorite son. He established a terrific family and friends base that allowed him to deny the tempting whistle, to stay true to the important work that was his calling. I would like to finish by thanking Joan and Emily and their wonderful family, who, by the way, were his most prized possessions. Thank you for sharing his heart with all of us. Thank God his heart was big enough to cram all of us in there, because he meant so much to us in our development and of becoming loving and caring human beings. Thank you.
Thanks, Ski. We're almost done. Thank you for bearing with us. But we have Pat Sullivan is here to wrap it up, and then we'll have Joan step up here, and we have a short, very short, about a minute clip. Sully had the opportunity to pitch for my dad back in the 60s. Had the opportunity to work with Dad here at the college. More importantly, was truly one of Dad's best friends, and one of our best friends within our entire family. And we're very happy to have Pat be our final speaker. Sully?
I had the great pleasure of playing for Gordie for 4 years in college, and of working with him here for 25 years. And I think I speak for everyone in the audience when I would say this: I never liked Gordie. Now, we've heard a lot about Gordie's driving, right? But Gordie also struggled a little bit with directions. Am I right on it? Now, I should be talking about that, right, Bob? I once took a team to Michigan, and the only problem was we were playing in Wisconsin. So we had to take a left, okay? But Pete, we're in your old neighborhood, right? Northeastern Illinois. And I thought Gordie made a wrong turn. Me, Mr. Directions, right? I'm thinking he made a wrong turn. So I mentioned it to him. He said, no, this is my old neighborhood. This is where we grew up. He said, I know this like the back of my hand. When we were driving on Dempster Street by Notre Dame and Niles, I thought we might jump on a tollway and go visit Earl in Milwaukee. Now, you saw the video. You saw what a great speaker Gordie was, right? Well, I'd like to share one night that Gordie often referenced. I know Joan is aware of this, where Gordie really didn't have people sitting on the edge of their seats. We were asked to come to a local VFW, talk about St. Francis Athletics. So now, when Gordie is speaking, I'd like you to visualize this. To the right of Gordie were 3 tables where the veterans were playing poker, totally concentrating on the poker game. To the left of Gordie were 2 tables where they were shooting craps. Now, the guy who invited us coerced 2 of his friends to sit right in front of Gordie. He had imbibed a little bit that night. In the middle of Gordie's talk, he kicked over his beer bottle, and it just kept rolling down while Gordie was still trying to talk. Top it off, when we leave, we knew a fella from the Armory where we played basketball. And he said, hey, you 2 wait for me here. I got to go fight a Marine, and I'll be right back in. And the last thing I'd like to share on this topic is the Armory. When Gordie and I came here in 1976, we had a basketball team, but we had no place to play. There was no room in the local high schools because they need the schools for the gyms for their own use. So Jack Gore got us squared away to play in the Joliet Armory. And Gordie told me we're going to fix it up and it's going to look just like the Chicago Stadium where he had played. And then he said, we're even going to have an organ. That's how much we're going to make it like the stadium. I had never been in the Armory before, so I thought I better go see this place. I walked in, it was the dirtiest, filthiest floor that I'd ever seen. Literally, tanks and trucks were parked on the floor. No baskets, so you'd have to play a lot of defense because you weren't going to score. No baskets, no bleachers, no scoreboard, nothing, okay? Now, true to his word, Gordie got that place ready to go, and it was ready for opening day, except we had two problems. We did have the organ. Goose and Mark will remember this. We did have the organ. The problem was the organist. He knew two songs, the Mickey Mouse song and Funeral Dirges. Our kids really got excited. They were excited, warming up to Amazing Grace and the Ave Maria. Now, if I may, I'd just like to share a few serious thoughts. On April 14th of 1926, God gave us a gift. And he gave us a gift like no other gift. I know from talking to all the guys that next to your parents, probably the most important and the most influential person in your life was Gordie. Now, there's a great expression about life. Does this fit him? It's not what you gather, it's what you scatter. Think of all the goodness and the love and the values that he scattered. It's absolutely amazing. And I always felt this as I continue to work with Gordon, again, see what you think. I thought his athletic philosophy meshed perfectly with his philosophy of life. They were one and the same. He always liked to tell the story. Some of the Lewis guys will remember Mr. Grimes, the heavyset umpire. So Mr. Grimes made a call, favored Lewis. The other coach came out and talked to Mr. Grimes. He reversed the call, changed the call. So as Gordie's coming out of the dugout, Mr. Grimes, who was a big, tough guy, he said, Gordie, stay right there. He said, do you want me to keep the original call and make the wrong call? Or do you want me to change my mind and make the right call? Think about Gordie's life. You know, like Goose was saying, Gordie's teams won 2,402 games, but they did it the right way. Always the right way. And for all of us, he certainly wanted us to make the right calls in our lives off the field. I'm pitching sophomore year in Chicago. Tournament that Lewis always wins. I relieved my good friend Ken Nelson. Now it's the 9th inning, scores tied, bottom of the 9th. Tie score, tournament we always win. Eddie, you were coming up, I do remember that. You, Tom Thillins, all our good hitters were coming up. So what I did in the bottom of the 9th, I gave up 3 straight hits. We lost the tournament. Now a lot of you can relate to this. Before I got off the mound, Gordie was at the mound. And he said, you walk off this mound with your head up because you're going to win more games for Lewis than you'll ever lose. Think about when some of you went through tough times. Where'd the first call come from? Gord. Often followed by what? The handwritten note, right? Now I'm pitching another game. This is important. Summer League, okay? We're winning like 9-1. Top of the 9th, I'm on first base. 2 outs. Ball's hit to the left fielder. Think about Gordie on this, okay? Ball's hit to the left field. It's going to be caught. It's an easy out. So I kind of trotted to second base, right? It's a summer game. It's probably 10:30 at night. We got to get 3 outs. As I'm going to the dugout, and Gord's coaching third base, he just stopped me. He looked me in the eye. He said, "Don't ever do that again." I didn't go all out on the play. When you played for Gordie, you had to go all out on every play. And the same with what he wanted for you in your life. To go all out and do all the good that you could do. And I'd like to finish with this, two quotes. The first comes from one of my favorite country songs. The group Alabama has the song, "There Are Angels Among Us." And I think the refrain, when it was written, they may have had Gordie in mind, because the refrain goes like this: angels come down to us to show us how to live. Gordie never told us how to live. He showed us how to live, okay? Let me get the right. Show us how to live, to teach us how to give. Who gave more? And to lead us with the light of love. And Joan, see what you think. A woman named Maggie Smith writes a lot about dying and death. And she wrote this: "There's no such thing as endings. There's only a place where we leave our stories." And Mike, that's what we did today. We shared stories, and we'll continue to share stories for the rest of our lives about the greatest coach that ever lived, and certainly one of the greatest men that any of us have ever known. Man, thank you.
Before Joan speaks, quickly, just from our family, we couldn't have asked for anyone better for the last 30 years to love and to care and to give all that she possibly could to make my dad feel the way that he did. And from all of us, we want to say thank you and tell you how much we love you.
I always remember Gordie talking about his laddie bucks. Anybody ever heard that term before, his laddie bucks? He always talked about how much he loved his laddie bucks, and ladies too, of course. It's so nice to have all of you here. It means ever so much to Gordie and I that you've all gathered to honor him. I always wish that I could sing a thanks, because I think I'd do it better than speaking. I'm not the speaker in the family. Dad was the speaker. Gordie was the speaker. Yeah, that's true. I do know the words usually. We used to have lots of go-arounds about that. He always had me guessing what the song was on the. We always watched the channel with all the favorites on it, and I'd be in the kitchen working, and he'd say, "What's that song? If you can guess this, I'll give you $1,000. Must have done that how many times over 30 years? I never saw the $1,000, and I always guessed the song. Couldn't figure that out. I want to thank the university for hosting this. Especially I want to thank Dave Laquetta, who's just done yeoman's job getting this all put together in a very short time. Would you just join me by clapping once for David again, please? Thanks, David. And of course, the staff who helped him do all of this. If there was any pride in Gordie, It was in his players and in their accomplishments. It was in his family and their accomplishments. It was in his friends and their accomplishments. If there was any pride in Gordie, it was in what they did, never what he did. He loved you all with a heart that was bigger than life itself. And as has been said many times today, that will continue in all of you who loved him so much and will carry on his legacy. We all loved him. We will all continue to love him. And as he would say to all of you, as he often did on the phone when you called him, God bless.
To finish up this beautiful, beautiful day, we have two little things in a minute video. And if you could just think about my dad saying this to you right now, is that the real purpose of our existence is not to make a living, but to make a life. A worthy, loving, giving, well-rounded, useful, God-glorifying life. Because that's what he did.
Coach Gillespie has been inducted into 15 Hall of Fames, but there is only one Hall of Fame that matters to him. A Hall of Fame he has not yet been inducted into.
There's only one. You may think I'm being a little trite here, or carp, or whatever you want to call it. There's only one Hall of Fame. There's only one Hall of Fame, and that's heaven. Everything is about Jesus, okay? If you want to say I'm a Jesus freak, I'm a Jesus freak. I don't mind being said I'm a Jesus freak. A legacy, he was an honest man. He was an honest man, and a loving man, and a guy that loved Jesus.
I'll leave you with this. Do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times that you can, to all the people you can, as long as you ever can. Dad did that for over 80 years. Dad, we love you and we'll miss you. Thank you very much for being here.